Did I enjoy the final book in the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne? Let's talk about Wrath. So, Wrath by John Gwynne is the last book in The Faithful and the Fallen, Book 4. Now, before I get to my spoiler-free review of Wrath specifically, I wanted to take a moment just to note something about the series as a whole. Malice was a really weak entry. It's a very weak first book, and it's long for a first book that just doesn't accomplish all that much. In my review for Malice, I mentioned that I felt like the book could have basically been a novella and would have been far more impactful than it was. So I can't really recommend this series to people unless they are looking for high fantasy stories that are really tropey. Even though he does eventually turn those tropes on their head in Ruin, you're going through almost 3 books where it's just a very tropey, typical high fantasy story. Yes, there are some positives and some cool stories being told in these, but at the same time, unless you have a lot of time on your hands and you are just reading up a storm and you think you could burn through one of these in a day or less, I can't really say that this is a good investment of your time. There are definitely other stories out there that I think may have what you are looking for and that you can get through a little more quickly to get to the good stuff. It took a long time to get to the good stuff in The Faithful and the Fallen. First of all, the payoff. John Gwynne is really good at payoff. He sets up all of these stories and essentially is making a promise every single time. That's kind of what every writer does in a book, right? Is they give us some sort of promise, whether it is vague or extremely specific. They tell us what's going to happen by the end. Not necessarily this is how the story ends, but more so that I'm promising you right now that by reading the story, you're going to learn what happens to Corbin, or you're going to learn what happens to McKean. Does McKean get his revenge? You're promising the reader that they're going to learn that, and that's usually what leads to disappointment, is when a promise isn't actually delivered on. Now, he's not promising us McKean is going to get his revenge. He's promising us you're going to find out if he does and how he goes about it. And I think that he does a great job of fulfilling every promise that he made in the series, which is something that definitely needs to be noted, because not all authors do that, especially in epic fantasy stories. In fact, it's so prevalent in epic fantasy that we often find ourselves waiting a very long time for subsequent books in a series because the author is struggling to fulfill all the promises that have been made, usually because the author didn't outline the entire series first. I'm very much a plotter, not a pantser. Wrath does a great job of fulfilling the promises made by the Faithful and the Fallen series. So if you have already read the first 3 books and you're not sure if you want to continue, I can tell you that you're going to get payoff for all of the story threads and everything does get tied up. In fact, my next point is actually that everything gets tied up a little too neatly. The knot that John Gwynne ties with all of these character threads and plots and everything just feels like a neat little bow instead of the tangled mess that I was kind of expecting from this ending, because it should be complicated. I mean, we are talking about the potential end of the world and forces from other worlds clashing against each other in the real world, and I wanted it to be a lot more messy and bloody than it was. The only reason I didn't predict this ending is because it was so predictable, and I didn't expect a predictable ending for the story. I was sitting here thinking, well, it's definitely not going to be this because that's too predictable, and we've already seen that John Gwynne wants to turn things on their head and make things more interesting and unique. And then it just kind of felt like he went back to following all of the typical beats in a high fantasy story by the time we get to the end of the book. And I was pretty disappointed by that. Now, I will say this, there is one character who I really love whose ending I found to be really beautiful and extremely well done. To be completely honest with you, I feel like if instead of following the chosen one in the series, we just followed this character, and I don't want to spoil it because I don't want to tell you who gets the great ending, but I think that if we just followed this character, it would have been a way more interesting story, and it could have just been one book, honestly. I really loved his ending. I found it to be beautifully written and well done, and it was also the only moment here that actually had me really feeling anything. Ruin was filled with emotion and feeling, and Wrath, I didn't really feel anything until the end of one character's arc. There was just a moment in there that I thought was really well written. All of the other endings were average in the sense that they were really predictable. They were well written and there's a lot to love about them, but they were just so predictable. There just weren't any twists or shocking moments or things that were going to make Wrath a memorable story for me. I will always remember several moments in Ruin because they were so well done, but Wrath, I feel like it's kind of forgettable.
I beg your unbelievable pardon.
Now, as I'm giving all of this feedback that sounds negative, I wanted to take a moment to say that John Gwynne's writing continues to get better. Every single book has been better than the last in terms of his actual writing. The writing in Wrath is better than the writing in Ruin, even if I don't like the actual story beats. John Gwynne's prose, approach to characters, his dialogue, everything just seems to be improving between each character. Between each book, John Gwynn's prose and characters and dialogue, everything just seems to be improving. The only thing that I feel didn't improve in Wrath Over Ruin was the actual story beats themselves. I felt like it was lacking and just wasn't all that exciting of a conclusion to the series. But the writing itself and John Gwynn's mastery of the craft has just improved exponentially between each book, and it has me really excited to read Shadow of the Gods. After finishing this, I can really see why people said they didn't like Malice, but then they loved Shadow of the Gods, largely because he's improved in his writing so much between the books. Now, I know that he has at least one other series that he's written between The Faithful and the Fallen and the Bloodsworn between The Faithful and the Fallen and the Bloodsworn Saga. So I'm sure that Shadow of the Gods is even better than this one. It totally makes sense that people really didn't like Malice, but then love Shadow of the Gods. He's written a lot since then, and I've seen his growth over the course of this series. This book is so much better than Malice was, so I can only imagine how much better Shadow of the Gods is over Malice. So I am super stoked to get into Shadow of the Gods. My expectations for that are really high, and so I'll say if you read Malice and didn't like it and gave up on John Gwynne entirely, you may want to consider revisiting him. Check out some reviews of Shadow of the Gods, like mine, that should be out here in a few days. Just make sure you subscribe to the channel and you'll see it when it pops up. Tips. I have one last negative thing I want to talk about before I get to my overall rating, and it's really just a small gripe, but it is one that I think needs to be mentioned, and that is that John Gwynne really loves capturing people. I mean, a lot. It happens so often in this series that it is painful by the time we get to Wrath, and it is still happening. People get captured all the time, and then the captors don't really seem to know what to do with them, and when they finally do decide what they're going to do with their prisoners, the prisoner gets rescued or escapes or whatever, and it is just a constant story beat, and at a certain point it stops making sense these people are being captured. It just kind of feels like there's plot armor that is protecting them, which obviously I'm gonna have a problem with. I mean, at some point I just started rolling my eyes when people got captured. It just started to feel more like a meme than a compelling story beat. If people are inconsequentially captured this frequently in the Bloodsworn Saga, I don't think I'm gonna read past the first book. I guess we're gonna find out. I hope that isn't what happens, because it was a lot in The Faithful and the Fallen. All right, let me give my overall rating to you for Wrath by John Gwynne, the final book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. But before I get to that, I wanted to let you know that you can like, comment, and subscribe, all at no cost to you. It's totally free. I don't know if you knew that or not. If you didn't, that's strange. I'm pretty sure it's always been free. Doing all of those things really helps me out and helps with the channel. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to do that. And let's get to my overall rating for John Gwynne's Wrath. I liked it. It was pretty good. It wasn't as good as Ruin, and it wasn't the best ending for the series, but there were some really great endings in here. There are some awesome character moments in this book, but at the same time, I feel like it lost some of the charm that I found in Ruin. I say charm, I don't know if that's the right word, but it lost a lot of what I loved in Ruin. A lot of it just wasn't present for Wrath. And yeah, his writing is improving, but the story beats themselves, they just weren't all that great. And by the time it wrapped up, I felt a little more relieved that I was finished with the book as opposed to satisfied with the series overall. I'm gonna go ahead and give Wrath 4 stars because it was above average overall, and I thought that it was pretty decent, but it just wasn't the ending I was looking for, and it kind of went back to the tropey roots that I didn't particularly enjoy in the previous books. Some of it was predictable, some of it I didn't predict because I didn't expect it to be so predictable, which is a weird sentence. I just expected more from the story and didn't really get it. So 4 stars to John Gwynne's Wrath, and I'm gonna start reading, and I'm gonna go ahead and start reading Shadow of the Gods, and we'll get my thoughts out on that book as soon as I possibly can. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it. If you would like to see another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. And until next time, bye.